So 1 in 100 children are diagnosed with autism, and diagnosis generally occurs between the ages of 0 and 2. Aspect, my client, look after over 10,000 people in New South Wales with autistic spectrum disorders, and from Thornton down to the Central Coast, they do this through 100 satellite locations. So the support services involved are fairly disparate throughout the state. The purpose of Jen's House is to bring all these support services together alongside a childcare centre for mainstream and autistic children, and essentially create a one-stop shop kind of thing for the families that are already stressed, travelling here, there and everywhere for their children, just come to one location in a regional centre such as Newcastle. So the project, in terms of concept, children with autism tend to be either overwhelmed or underwhelmed by sensory stimulation, and in learning how to deal with these stimuli, they can then learn how to react appropriately to their greater world and their greater environment in a social sense. So that gave me a very sensory sort of focus for the project, and the idea that an object static within the landscape might become something more or alive or something meaningful when you interact with it beyond simple observation. So this was sort of gathered from the snake puzzle here, which I found in a toy shop that was geared towards autistic children, and similarly with Zaha Hadid's response to a doll's house. So they're both puzzles, but they can be rearranged in tactilely in various different combinations to give a rejuvenation of the sense of form and function. So in terms of location, the project's located in Newcastle West, on the corner of Hunter, Tudor and Railway Streets, on the old site of Dairy Farmers Corner. The heritage building on the site, the Dairy Farmers Corner building, forms a focal point at the end of Tudor Street, so that's coming straight through here. So the idea that the new building might wrap that existing building and provide a backdrop to the existing heritage building on site, which has been done similarly locally once for the Bellevue Hotel, and twice at the Greater Building Society down on Tudor Street. Interestingly, the two roads that those projects are on, the Bellevue on Hunter Street and the Greater Building Society on Tudor, those two streets intersect at the site, so that they intersect at this point. So there is already sort of a local context for heritage buildings and new buildings of this type in the area. Moving into the plans, split levels played a very important role in how the daycare section of the project works. Starting, basically the idea was to give the children, as they move through the facility, through different age groups, a different perspective of the building and the immediate environment. So starting here at the lower ground level, which is 1.5 metres below street level, is the age group 0 to 2 playrooms. And typically the playrooms will be 2 playrooms per age group, either side of a central shared zone with amenities and utility spaces and whatnot. With the 0 to 2s, you've also got the 2 sleeping rooms on either side for the babies, and also the external play space courtyard area, which is separate to the main play space above. At street level, we've got 2 main entries. The main daycare entry on Hunter Street over here, the public entry, and the second more private entry round on Railway Street for therapies and support services. It's a bit of a quiet and private entry. On this level there's also the heritage building. Now the heritage building on this level doesn't have a link to the new building, because the intention there is that the building will become a public building primarily, housing an indoor play area, a restaurant and the toy shop, which I got those toys from, which they have lots of sensory toys that are specifically created to help out children with autism. On this level there is also the 3 to 6-year-old playroom, which comes out directly onto the main central courtyard space play area. Moving up another half level, so 1.5 meters above street level, is the dining space. Now the dining space will serve the 3 to 6s and the 2 to 3-year-olds. It has views out to the central courtyard area, but there's no access from that point. So combining all those together, basically 0 to 2s are furthest from the entry point. They're sort of in the quietest part of the site. They're set down, they're more protected. They're in a sensitive stage where diagnosis occurs, and they watch quite carefully away from the rest. At the same time, the 2 to 3s and the 3 to 6s have a much higher enrolment population in the facility, so they're much closer to the front entry for circulation purposes. Moving up to level 1, we've still got the double height spaces from the heritage, the 2 entries and the dining room there. We've got the 2 to 3-year-olds directly above the 3 to 6s over here. They come out into an external play space that is a balcony that looks down over the main play space. It's also connected via ramps so that those 2 play spaces are shared and interconnected. There's also therapy spaces down in that corner over there and research spaces above. On this level, the heritage building does link in via a link bridge on either side. On the mezzanine of the heritage building is where the professional services will be housed, their offices, so occupational therapy, psychology, speech pathology, all those sorts of people will be in there. Level 2 and 3 are pretty much a repeated floor plan, they're very similar. So we've got therapy spaces, office spaces, staff lunch and training room, and more offices. And then level 3, where again it's therapy rooms, offices and function meeting spaces for support services, events and group therapies and things like that. Moving into the sections. This section you can see the half level of the dining room raised above the street sort of level of the entry foyer and the main courtyard there. And you can also start to see the external materiality of the building. It's clad in zinc panels with a standing seam with openings that are portrayed through colour. This idea I got from a childcare in Marrickville who used Elycopon panels to playfully emphasise their entry point. So the next section, you can see the differing levels of the play areas. So over on this side, the 0 to 2s down nestled, protected in the earth. Moving up to street level is the 3 to 6s and then the balcony above for the 2 to 3-year-olds. And then the third section shows the relationship between the heritage building on the left and the new building on the right. It also I started to look at the actual colours and the patterns that were being used. So I wanted to do something a little more textural, both visually and tactilely, than an Elycopon panel. So I started looking at Sauerbruch and Hutton and how they used colour on their buildings and ceramic patterns, and how when you look at them on an angle they become a solid plane of colour, whereas if you move your angle of viewing they can become quite textural and change the building in subtle ways. So that was the material I ended up going with for the coloured reveals. Zooming in to the link bridge. The link bridge is supposed to recede. It's not supposed to be visually dominant. It's not supposed to be a feature. It's supposed to link the 2 buildings subtly and gently and allow them to still stand within the same space individually and uniquely. So the technical section just shows the bridge in the background there with the 2 buildings standing side by side. The bridge will connect in terms of structurally. The bridge is steel and glass, so the steel will just lock into the structure of the heritage building, while the glass extends beyond the structure. So it gives an illusion that it will abut the heritage building just with a silicon joint. So it gives the illusion that it's just lightly clinging to the heritage building. It's creating like a gentle seam between the old and the new. And it's just some more on how it's constructed and its materials. Materials were a big focus for this project, primarily in the ground plane, because these are the surfaces that children come in contact with at the age of 0 to 6. So in terms of the entry foyer, which we can see here, sort of robust, large materials, we use like large tiles, large operable louvers over on the far side. There are views from the front through to the courtyard, which are slightly obscured by the coloured battens. And then moving into the playrooms in the courtyard. So the playrooms are pretty much identified by colour, and so each playroom will have its own individual coloured reveal in the openings, and that's primarily a wayfinding thing for the children. But in the central zones between them, where the amenities and craft spaces and quiet rooms occur, will be neutrally coloured. Materials differ greatly. They go from tile, carpet, vinyl, depending on the use of the space. And then moving into the courtyard, they become very natural materials, so ironbark decking, grass, softball mulch and sand, again reinforcing that tactile experience of the immediate environment, whether it's built or natural. Also, a really important part of the project was the planting. Seasonal planting can enhance the sensory experience of a surrounding. So, for instance, the apricot trees sort of in the 5 metre setback between the two buildings would bloom in spring, and they are aligned with louvers, which would open and carry that scent on the breeze through the building. Similarly, the maple in the centre of the site provides sort of a tactile sense with crunchy leaves and whatnot, but it also changes as the season goes on, so it allows different levels of light into the courtyard and the play spaces as it changes and grows with the seasons. So central courtyards was something that was fairly common as I researched this, but seasonal planting was an idea that cropped up through this project called One Kid's Place by Mitchell Architects, and they had a courtyard which they lined with seasonal plants for a similar effect. It was really important that the playrooms have a very close connection to the external environment. Aside from regulations saying that they have to, it was really important to look at the relationship and how it's performed and how that link is formed, and looking at sort of making sure that the external environment becomes part of the internal environment. And that was inspired by 20Martin architects who did a childhood psychiatric rehabilitation centre, which had a lot of really small spaces, and some of those really small spaces had really subtle connections to small external spaces. So the relationship, that gentle sort of seamless relationship between the inside and the outside became quite important as well. This section just shows those areas, the playrooms stacked with the offices above, and it also shows how the battens work, how they behave when they reach the edge of the slab. Because they're an RHS, I couldn't just cut them. So if they've returned up on the side of the slab, which gives that coloured reveal around the side of the building, and that detail is repeated throughout the building, and similarly at the awning in the entry as well. And that's it.
Great. Thank you.